hope that's not too loud.
All right, we are live. How about that?
I know. Hi, everybody.
Greetings. Welcome to Intelligent Disclosure with Richard Dolan and Tracy Garbett Dolan. How are we doing that name?
Yeah.
Tracy Garbett Dolan. We're going to do the name. I'm going to adjust this one time, just one time, and hopefully final time. So welcome. Very happy to be here with you. It's August 21st, 2018. I prepared a fairly detailed show presentation, I should say, for tonight. And I'm looking forward to providing that. And I see a question, are you a hybrid?
I know.
That one.
You're talking seriously, and that just popped up, and I reacted to that.
So, yeah, no, I don't think so. Do you think so?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
But who knows? Maybe we all are, right? Who knows?
So before we get started, I think you want to do a couple of quick updates.
Yes. First of all, I'm not going to out anyone, but someone asked me, they were trying to understand how live works. So all of you who are here already know. So this is not for you. This is for people who click on the videos after and they don't understand what live is. I'm just going to quickly explain that, for some other generations that have asked.
Right.
If you click on it live, nothing's going to happen. We can't see you. You can only see us. And you don't have to be a part of the chat. You can just watch it like a normal YouTube. It's just live. Sometimes, you don't have to be there right at 8. You could show up a little bit later. That's fine. And you just enter into the live arena with us. And there is a chat available. So you can, if you want to, go in and put a question or a comment, and you'll see lots of other people's. You can just read them as well, or you can totally ignore it. That's all it is.
It's simple. You just come in, refresh the screen, end of story.
Yes.
All good.
At 8 o'clock, if you go there a couple minutes before, you might not see it. So at 8 o'clock, just refresh, and then you should see it. So
I think
that's it.
Probably quite sufficient.
Yes. So we want to, as usual, we want to introduce Michael and Lori, who are pursuing X, and they're helping us. They're moderating the chat. They're amazing. We couldn't do this without them. They help us with your questions. And so hi to them. And we just want to thank them so much for their help.
Yes.
So should we just go over what's been going on?
Well, a couple of recent programs I think we just wanted to catch people up on before I jump in.
Right. So we're going to talk about the Richard Dolan show. So last Monday was Chuck Fay.
Right. We aired the interview with Chuck Fay from Hong Kong. We may have talked about this briefly on this program.
We did.
Essentially, Chuck's from Hong Kong. He's a very engaged researcher into the UFO subject. It was a real treat for me to be able to talk to someone from that part of the world who really had his own deep insights and research into the phenomenon. So we had a very engaging conversation, which is here on YouTube. You can watch it. And then for people who are members of the Richard Dolan member site, there's an additional follow-up interview that we did with Chuck that goes a little bit deeper. So that's worth checking into as well.
They're usually a little bit more candid, and I'll jump in there and ask them some questions that I'm interested in as well.
And then we did Joseph Farrell.
Yes, this past Monday. So this should be up on YouTube now.
No, I think the YouTube will have that up probably tomorrow.
Okay.
I'm going to clean up a little bit of the audio, and we're going to upload that. I'll make sure that goes up. But Joseph and I did an interview that aired on KGRA radio just yesterday, and it was long overdue. Joseph and I, we've known each other a long time. If you're not familiar with Joseph Farrell, well, look him up. But Joseph is probably the world's leading expert on the development of Nazi technology and its relationship to the UFO subject. There's a couple of surprises in this interview. So you may have listened to it live when it aired, but it will be on this YouTube channel, as I say, very, very soon. And when I say surprises, I'm not kidding. Like, people associate Joseph with the guy who says that all UFOs are Nazi tech, and he adamantly does not say that. He does not say that. And in fact, what we really had was an incredibly candid, I was going to say interview, but really more of a discussion. But really, Joseph had full reign to just get into all of it. We dealt with Nazi tech, UFOs, Antarctica, Operation High Jump. We had a long conversation about all of that. We got into 9/11, Remember, Joseph has had a lot of research he's done on 9/11, and I've had a strong interest in it as well. Quite a bit more.
Then you did the for the after interview.
Oh,
you went into Q and a little bit more into 9/11, right?
Yeah. So guess who's also have some thoughts on QAnon is Joseph Farrell, and he and I have both. I think we've got very compatible views on a lot of things. He's always interesting. Oh, we had a long conversation for the interview on Putin. Oh yes, we got into Putin, and that was very satisfying. Very satisfying. Joseph's done some deep research on that, and I loved hearing what he had to say. All of that will be on YouTube probably tomorrow, as I say. And then the members interview, the après interview, we got into a whole thing on Q, which was quite interesting. At some point, I'll do a talk here on, hopefully on Q. I mean, look, I'm not an expert on QAnon. I'm not going to pretend. All I can say is I've taken some time to become acquainted with what that's all about. I think I've briefly expressed some opinions in public, but we can get into more of the details in the future.
I think that's Joseph's thing too, right? He doesn't really follow Q, but he has kept an eye on it and
I think so, yeah.
About it, yeah.
Yeah, but neither of us are dismissive of it. I'll say that. Like, both of us really have come to the conclusion that whoever is behind Q is probably, I think in his opinion, it's a team of people. I don't think he believes it's one person. And it doesn't mean that he believes in the kind of Trump worship that you really get with Q. I don't think Joseph subscribed to it, and I don't subscribe to it either. But it's also not going to do to just be dismissive of QAnon as some kind of LARP or something else like that. I've never found that to be believable, and he doesn't either. So we'll leave it at that for now. But that's Joseph Farrell. It will be definitely an interview you're not going to want to miss.
So that was this past Monday, going up on YouTube soon. And then we have coming up next Monday on KGRA. We did a pre-record because, again, Richard is...
This is a good one.
Wanting to look at global ufology. So we chose Germany next. And Robert Fleischer. And you guys had an amazing interview and a wonderful after interview as well.
We really did. Robert's a journalist out of Germany. I've known him for a while. He's a very serious and a good researcher. So we had a very extended conversation on German and European UFOs and ufology. The unbelievable stonewalling of the German government is beyond almost anything that you find anywhere else in Europe. Germany is really, really bad when it comes to UFOs. They have a lot of sightings, but the government there is not friendly at all to UFO studies. Robert has a lot to say about that. He also is very conversant with what's going on in France. He's a real Francophile, and he has a lot to say about French UFOs. He spent time in our after interview. He did this whole reinvestigation of the 1965 Valençol case.
Fascinating.
If you follow ufology, this is an amazing case. Mm-hmm. A lavender farmer named Maurice Mas, who had an encounter with a landed craft in his lavender field in 1965 with two beings. And everyone who knew Maurice Mas, they said he was this very conservative, stand-up, reliable guy in the community. Anyway, so Robert did a very detailed investigation of that, and we talked about that.
Okay, I hope I'm not wrong, but he's doing a documentary on this.
Yes, he is. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, that should be good. He's an accomplished, or he's a very talented filmmaker. So he's putting together a documentary. So we'll come out with information on all of that when it comes out.
And then I shouldn't go this far ahead, but I want to.
Why not?
Just because amazing Australian researcher that Richard had a pre-recorded interview with last night, Moira McGee. We've been talking about her a little bit. We talked about her last week. We've been reading her books at night, and we love this book. And I know a lot of people were asking last week where to get this. And
the Alien Gene.
It is not easy to get.
No, it turns out we didn't know this. You can only get it on her website. Thanks, Moira. Amazon is the way to go.
So we're pushing her a little bit.
But her website, I'm going to plug her website right here. So it is the, you have to Google International Network of UFO Research.
Yes, she has a really great website that she says she posts. She thinks it's important to educate people on what's going on astronomically. So she puts really interesting updates on her website.
She's really brilliant and has been doing UFO research for many decades. She doesn't want to say how many because it's a long time. And she's had she's met everyone. She knows an incredible amount, and her writing is very, very good. She's a good writer. So Moira's worth reading, in my opinion.
She has excellent stories.
Her book, Contact Down Under, is actually, it's the best book on Australian UFOs I've ever encountered. It's a great book.
Yeah, so there was a fun after interview with that, but we definitely are thinking about a part 2 because she's fun. She has so many stories to tell, and they're not stories. There are so many cases, I should say. She's very serious about her research, so calling them stories doesn't do it any justice.
No, Moira's great.
Yeah.
So that will come out in a couple of weeks.
Right. So that's what's going on there. As far as appearances, I'll just tell you quickly. Mid-September, the 14th through the 16th, there is the True Legends Conference. We'll be in Branson, Missouri for that. It's transhumanism and the hybrid age. So transhumanism and UFOs, basically.
Check our website for that.
Yep, it's on our calendar. And that conference is available in live stream. So if you can't go,
great.
That's another way you can. But I'm going to hand this over to Richard so he can dive into what he wants to talk to you about. I just want to say hi to everybody. See you all on there. We'll be back.
Thank you. So I'm fighting off. I've got some kind of sore throat. I'm hoping that let me just fix this here. I've got my microphone here, so hopefully this will come through pretty well. I'm hoping the audio is good. So I want to talk about military encounters with UFO, primarily military. Actually, they're not 100% exclusively, but most of these are military UFO encounters, and how they can at times be deadly, and at times be matters of life and death. You know, just not long ago, within the last year, we all learned of the famous Tic Tac UFO encounter from 2004 involving the USS Nimitz off the coast of Southern California. Commander David Fravor of the U.S. Navy and his encounter with this very, very unusual object. And that wasn't a life and death encounter. But what was interesting about it is how our society treats these things. It's as if we're in this state of perpetual amnesia, like where we forget that there's this incredible long history of experiences that military people have had with UFOs for many, many years and many, many times. And they go right on back to the beginning of the modern era of UFOs. And some of them are much more dramatic than even the Tic Tac UFO encounter. So I just want to recount some of these. I think I've collected maybe like 10 or so encounters. And that'll give us enough time with the space that we have here, just to give you an idea that this is a serious phenomenon that does occasionally involve the death of pilots and other individuals who have encounters with these things. Maybe the most famous one is one of the earliest ones that we know of, and that's this famous Mantell case. And a lot of researchers are familiar with this, but I'll just run this by you. So this goes back to January 7, 1948. About 1:20 in the afternoon, there's a large object seen by the commanding officer and a lot of other people at a place called Godman Air Force Base. That's in Kentucky. A lot of people saw this. It was described as a very bright, either like a disc or a cone-shaped object or round. About an hour after this, there's a flight of P-51s that are flying in by the base. The flight commander was Captain Thomas Mantell, and he was asked to look into this if he could. So he had two other aircraft that were with him. So they tried to intercept this object, and they get to an altitude of about 15,000 feet. The other two pilots say, look, we're not equipped with oxygen. We got to turn back. It starts to become very difficult at that altitude and dangerous, very dangerous, right? So Mantell didn't have oxygen either, but he decides he's going to keep going for a little while. A little unusual for Mantell. Everyone described him as generally a very cautious person, but he kept going anyway. So a few minutes later, he reports that he can see this object and then it's moving at a pretty good clip, about half of his speed. So he was going at about 360 or so miles per hour. So his estimate is this object was moving at a little under 200 miles an hour. They said, well, can you describe it? He says, well, it appears to be metallic or metallic object. And then he said, it's of tremendous size. So that's interesting. So Mantell's up there. This was not the last thing that happened to Thomas Mantell. For another 30 minutes or so, he was up in the sky, up in the air, chasing after this thing. 30 minutes go by. His final contact with the base was about about a quarter after 3 or so in the afternoon. So still bright daylight. And he says, it's directly ahead of me, slightly above. It's now moving at about my speed or better, so it had increased its speed. I'm trying to close in for a better look. That was the last thing anyone ever heard of Thomas Mantell. Shortly after this, he goes into a downward spiral, and he crashes. He almost certainly lost consciousness from a lack of oxygen. So for a long time, the Air Force said, well, Mantell saw the planet Venus and he got confused. And I'm like, are you kidding me? No one ever believed that explanation. That's a joke. I mean, it's an insult, really. I mean, here's Mantell saying, metallic object of tremendous size, all right? And he said this long before his plane crashed, so no, I don't think so. You can't blame this either on a lack of oxygen at that point. Now, there was a lot of talk a few years after this that Mantell saw a particular kind of balloon known as a Skyhook balloon. And these were secretly being launched by the U.S. Navy back in those days. They were definitely large. They could move along at jet streams at some very high speeds and very high altitudes. So you could say maybe it could have been a Skyhook balloon. Okay, fair enough. Was it a Skyhook balloon? I suppose the answer is maybe it could have been. But I'll tell you why I don't think so. So a number of years ago, actually this is when I was doing research for my second edition of Volume 1 of UFOs in the National Security Statement. Back during that period, we're talking 2001, 2002, I was given information about these Skyhook launches from Clifford Stone. A lot of you know who Clifford Stone is. Clifford was in the U.S. Army for 20 years. He was a veteran. He also has one of the best collection of UFO documents that I have ever seen. I was fortunate to be in Clifford's home on at least one occasion and got to see this firsthand. Anyway, Clifford checked with a Navy colleague of his at the Office of Naval Research for Skyhook, for all the Skyhook balloon plots. All right, so back at that time. And the answer that he appeared to have gotten is not only were there no Skyhooks launched that all through January up to that point, but there did not seem to have been any Skyhook balloons launched since the later part of December of the previous year. So we're talking several weeks prior to the sighting. There were no balloons out there. So now we don't have the full records of Skyhook launches. We don't really know for one way or another for certain. But from everything that I can see so far, I would not bet on the Skyhook balloon as the explanation. Maybe further research will settle this matter. But I do not believe Mantell saw a balloon. What did he see? Well, I don't know. Well, maybe it was a UFO. It was a large metallic object of tremendous size. So maybe we'll leave it at that. It's been a tendency for a lot of researchers to pass it off as a Skyhook balloon, but not sure that I would go that way. So here's another bizarre incident and a bizarre death, and this was from 1953. So we're moving ahead a little bit in time as I do these. And this is a pretty well-known case as well. Got some publicity about a decade ago, but this is from November 23rd, 1953, over Sioux Locks, Michigan. So we're up near the border with Canada, and up in that area, the U.S. Air Defense Command had radar installations all around there. One unit detected an unidentified target, an unscheduled and unidentified target at a place called Sioux Locks. Sounded pretty standard, honestly. You detect something unusual, you go and investigate. And they sent an F-89 fighter interceptor. This is under the command of First Lieutenant Felix Mcculloch. By the way, Mcculloch has his own wiki page. You go check it out. He's very like this is the kind of guy you want defending your nation. He looked very, very well put together, very sharp. So he's piloting this aircraft. So he had a lieutenant, excuse me, with him named Wilson. They go up there. So the radar station had Mcculloch's F-89 on its scope. They were tracking him and the UFO at the same time. So they see these two blips, and they see the two blips get closer and closer until they merge into one blip. This is like right out of a movie script, except it happened. For a moment, this single blip remained on the scope, and then it just disappeared. There was no trace, no wreckage of these of the missing men or the F-89 has ever been found. There was a claim about a decade ago that the aircraft was found. Folks at MUFON looked into it. There's no evidence that this was ever the case, that the wreckage was ever found. The late Donald Kehoe, the great UFO researcher at the time, and Frank Edwards. Before there was George Norrie, before there was Art Bell, there was Frank Edwards. So they were on this case, and they were able to get inside information about it, and that is how we know a lot of the things we do about it. That's a very disturbing case, and I think that's a straight-up UFO incident that involved the death of a couple of men. There's another disturbing incident. This is known as the Cuban Jet Incident. And this is less well known. It seems to have happened in March of 1967. I say seems to have. And you have to forgive me. Again, my voice is a little weak tonight. I'm actually glad to be able to do this at all. So hopefully I sound okay for you tonight. Anyway, the Cuban Jet Incident has been called that sort of informally. It's from March of 1967. The UFO researcher Stanton Friedman and Robert Todd, who was very active in the 1970s, learned about this about a decade after it happened. And I would say the consensus, even by many conservative researchers, is that this is probably an authentic case. So basically, we're back in 1967. Cuban radar controllers report an unidentified craft approaching Cuba from the northwest, that is, from the direction of the United States, okay? Moving very fast, just under about 700 miles per hour. It's a good clip. And traveling at a pretty good altitude, about 30,000+ feet. So that's what you might expect from a fighter aircraft. So far, everything's pretty standard. The Cubans sent out 2 MiG-21s. These are their fighter interceptors, and they're very, very excellent fighter aircraft themselves. So the MiG-21s were guided to within 3 miles of this object. So 3 miles is super close when you're talking about fighter aircraft. And at that moment, that's when the flight leader radioed in that the object was a bright metallic sphere. So not a jet. And he said it didn't have any visible markings on it whatsoever. He tried to establish radio contact with this object, whatever it was. That did not succeed. So Cuban Air Defense just says, destroy it. Pilot says, okay, I'm locked and loaded. He's ready to do it. And within seconds, the wingman, the other aircraft, screams. Guy screams into the radio and says that the flight leader's jet had disintegrated. The object then supposedly accelerated. It climbed out above close to 100,000 feet, super high up, and starts heading towards South America, and it's gone. Now, the U.S. appears to have been monitoring this. Of course they would, right off the coast of Florida, after all. And at Florida's Homestead Air Force Base, you had the 6947th Security Squadron. And it so happened that their units were under the control of the NSA. So Stanton Friedman learned about this incident in 1978. He had a connection who was a security specialist that was stationed at Homestead Air Force Base. So Stanton learned about it, and then Robert Todd learned about it independently shortly after this. And the interesting thing about Todd's, he was researching this and then received a very intimidating visit by the FBI at the behest of the NSA as a result of this. And from everything that I learned about this, Todd just let the investigation go at that point. Apparently they scared him to death. That's the Cuban Jet Incident. That's 1967. There's another case from 1967. Did not involve a death, but I want to include it. This is not a military case either, but I feel that it's definitely a significant case, and it's remembered in the nation where it happened, which is Canada. It's been, I think, almost totally forgotten in the U.S. But this is the Falcon Lake, Manitoba case involving a man named Stephen Mcculloch. This is May 19th, 1967. Mcculloch was like a mechanic and a prospector of, I think, quartz. So he was in his early 50s, and he's out doing prospecting pretty much out in the middle of nowhere in Manitoba. There's not a lot there once you get outside of Winnipeg. And he sees these two red glowing objects flying at a high speed above. And he's out in the wilderness at a place called Falcon Lake. And they look like they're disc-shaped. They get closer to him. One then just stops and hovers and then takes off to the west, and the other one landed. This is all according to what Mcculloch later said. So he's watching this landed craft. He gets close to it. He's behind some bushes, like 100, 150 feet, something like that. And he sees this. It's a landed craft. It's about 30, 40 feet wide, about 10 feet high, has a little dome, looks like a flying saucer. A couple of little slits on it, as I recall. So it looks totally exotic, but he's thinking experimental American aircraft. This is how he's thinking it. So he's watching this for about a half hour. And he sees a little door open in this craft. He doesn't see anybody, but the inside is very well lit from where he's watching it. So he decides he's gonna walk up to this thing. He gets to within about 50 or 60 feet, and he starts hearing voices. They're a little bit muffled because he's hearing like machinery, or maybe what sounds like an air conditioner. I'm sure it wasn't an air conditioner, but he's hearing this kind of machinery, and he's hearing voices, and definitely more than one voice. He says one sounded a little higher pitched than the other. So he's thinking that these are guys from America. He actually calls out, "Okay, Yankee boys having trouble? Come on out. We'll see what we can do to fix it, whatever." He does not get a response to this. Mcculloch actually spoke a number of languages. Yeah, I think he was an Eastern European immigrant. He spoke Russian, he spoke German, I think he spoke Italian, maybe French. So he's trying out all these different languages. He's not getting an answer. So he decides to peek inside the craft. And this is his own words, paraphrasing, but he sees like a maze of flashing lights inside this, different lights. He didn't see any particular pattern or order to them. He did say he looked at the thickness of the wall of the craft. He said it was about 20 inches, so almost 2 feet thick. Okay, so he just sticks his head in very briefly and then moves his head back. As soon as he moves his head back, the panels close off the opening. So it's like they were not wasting any time to get him the hell out of their craft. So he touched the craft with he had a glove on, and he had a rubber coating on the glove that melted as soon as he touched the craft. So almost immediately, this object begins to lift up off the ground. It angles a little bit, so the bottom of it is now facing him, and he sees what looks like a grid exhaust system, and it's got a pattern of these little circular, small circular vents, I guess. And he gets a blast of hot gas that comes at him from these vents. It just erupts at him. His shirt actually burns. He tears off his shirt because it's burning so much. He sees the object take off, clears the treetops, and it goes off to the west, same direction as the other craft had gone. It left a circle that was about 15 feet in diameter. The circle was seen by later investigators. So after this, Mcculloch feels dizzy. He vomits for days. He loses about 20 pounds in the coming weeks. He had burns over much of his body, his face, serious burns on his chest. There's a photograph of Mcculloch. You can Google this. It shows a pattern, like a grid pattern of circles matching the description of the exhaust grid on his chest while he's in a hospital bed. He gets intense headaches, rashes, swelling. His hands, he said, like just inflated like a balloon, I think he said. So All of this. Then he goes to a hospital in Winnipeg. Doctor says, yeah, this looks like exhaust from some kind of craft or aircraft. Had no idea what else this could have been. He sees a radiologist. Interesting. I think he saw a couple of radiologists. They couldn't find anything specifically wrong with him in terms of radiation. But the grid pattern stayed on his chest for quite some time, and no one was able to explain this. He had symptoms that lasted at least a year, maybe longer. He actually, on his own dime, went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, stayed there for a couple of weeks. Everyone saw the grid. No one could explain it. No one was able to fix his problems either. His health remained very poor, I believe. So, but they also said, man doesn't seem to be crazy. No significant mental illness, emotional illness, or anything like that. A little bit more to this. I don't know how much more we need to go into. The one interesting thing about this is that this occurred during the period of the so-called Condon Committee investigation of UFOs. This is the University of Colorado was contracted by the U.S. Air Force to do an allegedly scientific study of UFOs. That was a joke. That was a rigged game right from the beginning. But it is true that the Condon Committee sent an investigator, Dr. Roy Craig. He went out to there. Roy Craig seemed to have been a good academician, and I'm not trying to demean him, but I don't think he did a very good investigation of this particular case. But the Condon Committee conclusion, I don't think this was Craig, but they basically implied that the whole thing was a hoax, even though they didn't consciously say it. There's no evidence that this was a hoax whatsoever. And I will point out that the Royal Canadian Air Force was one of several groups that arrived on that scene, and they did detect heightened radiation. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they also are one of the groups that saw the circular pattern in the field. So that's a case where that was life, not death. Stephen Mcculloch did not die, but did get a very serious injury from this UFO. Here's another close call. This did not end in someone's death, but it's a fascinating case. Ever since I've learned about this case years ago, I've just been, it's not a well-known case, but it's one of those incredibly vivid cases in my mind. So this is from 1977. So we're moving ahead in time. This is June 17, 1977 from Portugal. All right. So this is just a very close call. So you have a Portuguese Air Force sergeant, a man named Jose Rodriguez, and he's flying what I believe is a standard training mission over a place in Portugal called Castelo de Bode. This is in the center of Portugal. There's a major dam at this place. So he's flying in this region. And it's kind of in between Lisbon and Porto, if you know a little bit about Portugal's geography. So he's down there and he sees this dark object coming at him in the air, right? So he doesn't know what this is. There's not supposed to be any dark object there. He notifies ground control. He says, there's a dark object coming at me. They're like, well, we don't see anything else. We're not reporting any other traffic. There's not supposed to be anything else there. So as it gets closer, he gets a better look at it. And he is able to estimate its diameter to some extent, roughly 40, 50 feet. He probably reported it in meters, let's say 15 meters in diameter. He sees that its upper section was black, so he gets a good enough look at it. The lower section had some sort of paneling that he's noticing on it, maybe windows. Anyway, he's getting enough of a view of it that it's fairly detailed. And the object just goes by him. It vanishes at this super high speed. Okay, so it's gone. But that's when his troubles begin. So Rodriguez, he has what's called directional electric gyroscope, and that starts rotating wildly. And his plane starts to dive out of control. Like he really dives. So just imagine, he's going down, like ready to crash right into the ground. He only regains control of his aircraft at treetop level and then pulls it right back up. He was so disturbed by this. He actually was almost unable to speak after he lands. Now, there were independent ground witnesses to this. They couldn't confirm the UFO. They were able to confirm this his dive of the aircraft and the apparent, what seemed like a power surge when he got control of the aircraft. So the Portuguese aircraft did look into it. They were never able to explain the event. So that's that one. And by the way, I see you looking kind of busy over there. Is there anything you wanted me to? Because I'm in the middle of this, but
there's a lot going on. No, if you want to keep going,
I want to keep
otherwise
going.
I'm going to come in and thank some people. But then I think you should keep going.
I want to thank everyone who's whatever you're doing. Thank you very much.
You're getting a lot of encouragement from people. People have been giving super chats. People have lots of great comments. So just keep it up.
Thanks.
We're loving it.
Thank you very much. We'll have time to answer some questions if you have some follow up. I will just say that I took some time this afternoon really to do enough research on this to present this to you in a way that was kind of organized. So if you're enjoying it, I'm glad.
They're all like, keep going, keep going.
Good. So
if you're liking it, though, if you want to hit the thumbs up, give us a like, support Richard's research that way, that would be awesome.
Thank.
But other than that, we want you to keep going.
All right, awesome. So so that was Portugal. So what I noticed when you're looking at these close calls, these near-death experiences, if we want to put it that way, there's a lot that took place in the late 70s. And I've often wondered about this because the late 1970s was a very dramatic period of UFO encounters. I don't know for a fact that it's really more dramatic than eras before or since. I've often felt that sometimes we're just as good as the reporting that exists at the time. And I think there's no question that the late 70s was a real high point in our ability or in our willingness globally to collect really excellent UFO reports. And now, having said that, there may be something to the fact that there was this apparent upsurge in reports from the late 70s. Something really may have been going on at that time. So I think it's a little bit of both. Definitely, there was a lot going on in South America during the late 70s. There was a series of disturbing deaths, actually, in the late 70s. Definitely in Brazil, along the Brazilian coast, the Atlantic coast, there's a city known as Colares. And the thing was, they were having very dramatic series of sightings throughout all of the late 1970s, including many, many close encounters going at least well into 1978, probably beyond that. There were reports coming in from at least 30 villages. This is at the mouth of the Amazon River, again, right near the Atlantic coast. So a number of years later, there was an American UFO researcher, Bob Pratt, actually, and along with a woman named Cynthia Luce. They investigated these cases. And one of their contacts was a retired Brazilian Air Force lieutenant colonel. His name, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, Urangue Holanda. So Holanda was their main guy here. He's telling them of this amazing encounter that he had with his company in toward the later part of 1977, early evening. You get this large, Holanda and his men see this large disc-shaped object just appears directly over them. They didn't see it approaching. It's very low in the sky, scares the hell out of these guys. It's pulsating. It's like there's this yellow glow to it. He said it sounded like some kind of machinery, but they couldn't tell what it was. At the center was a small series of yellow and orange lights. They changed color to like a light blue, and then they got dimmer. The object just disappeared, goes off toward the sea. Incredibly rapidly, just zooms off. So Holanda's, as you can imagine, kind of startled by this event. He goes to talk to his base commander. His base commander's impressed enough. He says, look, I'm going to give you a team of technicians, photographers, these other specialists, and they're going to help you, and you're going to do a classified investigation of what's going on here. And this actually all really did happen. And we know this happened because we've got Brazilian government declassified documents from 2002 that confirm this. But look, I'm getting ahead of myself. So Holanda and his guys, they spend about 4 months in Colares and these nearby areas, and they're interviewing hundreds of people. About 300 people are interviewed in this project. Imagine. Imagine if your nation's military were to engage and take this seriously enough that they're interviewing hundreds of local people about their close encounters. This happened in Brazil. So people are reporting. They're saying, like, so-and-so got burned from a UFO, or I got burned from a UFO. There were at least 2 fatalities that were reported to Hollanda or his investigators during their this 4-month period. And also what he noted is that during this time, he and his guys or his team are seeing strange lights, he said, almost every single night. They took photographs, and this is the frustrating thing about this phenomenon. None of them turned out well. Maybe it's because it was the 70s. Maybe they had crap equipment. I don't really know, but it's definitely frustrating. You would think that they would have the ability to take better photographs. They did not have good photographs. He did describe many of these UFOs. He said they were basically all different shapes you can imagine, disc-shaped, spherical, and a lot more. Including several of these objects, he said, were seen leaving the water. One of the questions that I know we were collecting before we started had to do with USOs, that is, unidentified submersible objects. I do intend to do a dedicated live stream program on USOs at some point in the future. It is an absolutely critically important part of this phenomenon, and I will get back into it. But anyway, so there were USOs connected with this case. Anyway, back to the Brazilian encounters at Colares. Bob Pratt, the American researcher, he couldn't really confirm every element of Hollanda's story. But Pratt did speak to a lot of Brazilian locals there, and he did speak to one of the doctors, an area doctor, who, for what it's worth, did confirm that there were UFO-related fatalities from that time. So there you go. And then I think, as I mentioned, I might have said 2002, but I think it was 2004, that there were documents from the Brazilian Air Force, from their Secret Service, revealed some of these records from the 1977 investigation. This was called, it had a name, it was called Operation Saucer. It wasn't completely released, but it was partially released to the public. There was the public portion that we have does not provide any conclusions of what they arrived at, what happened there, but it did confirm that there was such an investigation. So it was really quite interesting. Now here's the event that actually prompted me to do this. And I know some of you are thinking it's one event, but it's not. It's not that. It's not the Valenti case. Fred Valenti, I did wonder about doing this event. That was from 1978. He was an Australian private pilot. Maybe I will talk about him a little bit later. It is a tragic case. He was flying from Melbourne to Tasmania across what was called the Bass Straits. Fred Valenti was a young guy, but it was an experienced and dedicated pilot. Anyway, he did see he reported to Melbourne as he's going over the Bass Straits, an object that was approaching him and zooming around him and zooming over him. And there's a very long, dramatic transcript of this that is available. Valenti was never seen again. And he absolutely, I mean, that's a death that we have to attribute to UFOs. A couple of ridiculous attempts to explain that away, but I don't think any of them were ever serious or anyone took them seriously. But it was not the Valenti case that prompted me to do this, this particular presentation. No, it is the Fort Dix McGuire Air Force Base incident, 1978, January 18th, 1978. And this is one of the most interesting cases in all of ufology. I hear almost no one ever talking about it. I wrote about it in volume 2 of UFOs and the National Security State. I am convinced, as much as I'm able to be convinced, that this is a legitimate case and absolutely worth consideration. So this is an instance where the United States military appears to have shot and killed an alien. Now, considering the claim, it's not surprising that no one really knows what to make of this case, even to this day. And as much as I think it probably happened, I don't talk about it very much either, but I want to talk about it tonight. So the main witness, one of the problems is that the main witness is known only by a pseudonym of Jeffrey Morse. But, and although Jeffrey Morse was directly interviewed at length multiple times by at least two very credible UFO researchers. They were Richard Hall and Leonard Stringfield. These were two very active researchers from the 1970s and prior. In fact, both were former military themselves. Both of them described Jeffrey Morse as ultra credible and reliable. So anyway, so Morse was a security policeman at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey at this time. We're talking January 18th, 1978. So at 3 in the morning, Morse is notified about UFO activity over the Fort Dix base, which is right, Fort Dix Army base is right adjoining McGuire Air Force Base. Okay, they're separated by a fence. And Morse learns that a non-human entity had been shot. Okay. And what he learns is that a Fort Dix military MP, a military policeman, had been chasing a low-flying UFO, which had hovered over his car. Turns out that there was a night of UFOs being reported over the base complex. So anyway, so this MP has an object that's low over his car. A small being with a large head, little slender body appears in front of his car. The military policeman panics and he shoots this being repeatedly with his .45 caliber automatic pistol. Shoots it. And as far as Morse understands, the entity is shot dead. He and his companion find the body on a deserted runway. Of course, it's 3 in the morning, so they're probably all going to be deserted pretty much at this time, at McGuire Air Force Base. So following standard procedures, they cordon off the area. You get Blue Beret forces, that's special operations for the Air Force, arriving to take command of the situation. Later that day, a team from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base arrives in very large cargo aircraft. They take the body. 2 days later, Morse is summoned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He's interrogated at length about this event. They warn him that you better keep quiet. Shortly after this, he's transferred to Okinawa, Japan. And in fact, the same type of thing happened to other colleagues of his who witnessed the event in one way or another. They're all transferred out of the area. So Morse later contacts Leonard Stringfield, I think in the early 1980s. Stringfield interviews him in person and by phone as they develop a relationship, as he did with the researcher Richard Hall. And as I said, both of them found him ultra reliable. Richard Hall, I think, used the words completely credible. And in fact, as Hall said it, or as one of them said it, they said, look, if you're skeptical about UFO crash retrieval reports, that you could be justified. It's understandable whether you believe in UFOs or you don't believe in UFOs. They say, unless you have met Jeff Morse. Unless you've met Jeff Morse. So they were very impressed by this guy. And Morse stayed in touch with these researchers for at least a decade. He was harassed, threatened by officials for having discussed the matter with them. So that's Morse. So if he were the only source of this, you might say, well, interesting story, what can you do with it? But Jeffrey Morse is not the only source of the Fort Dix shooting of an alien. The other source is Air Force Major George Filer. I know George Filer personally. I spoke with George Filer multiple times about this incident. And if you know George Filer, he's the publisher of Filer's Files. He's been generating information about UFOs, like a weekly newsletter about UFOs for years, many, many years. And he's an excellent source of information, by the way. So George Filer is a very serious man. And George Filer was Deputy Director of Intelligence at the time for the 21st Air Force, which was at McGuire Air Force Base. He worked at McGuire, okay? His responsibilities at that time included about 300 aircraft that were being used for military troop carrying missions, some of which flew the President of the United States and other important dignitaries. So that was Filer's job. So he was very, very significant at McGuire. So on the day of this incident,